All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on our ISG webinar on rural lending and taxes and how the Farm Bill shapes the future. We have two really good experts on some farm policy. First, we have Ed Elfmann. Ed serves as the Vice President of Agriculture and Rural Banking Policy for the American Bankers Association in Washington, D.C. He has been with ABA since June 2012 and is ABA's head of policy on agriculture and rural credit and lending issues. In addition to that, Ed also works on swaps and derivatives policy, financial services, and appropriations for ABA. We also have with us today Danielle Beck with Invariant. Danielle is a leader in agricultural policy and using her deep expertise to help Invariant's clients navigate and master the complexities of the Farm Bill and appropriations process. Danielle is a veteran of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, where she oversaw a broad portfolio of policy issues. On Capitol Hill, she was an essential member of Rep. Tom Rooney's staff, managing work on Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee and Agriculture Livestock Subcommittee. And I think with that, I will hand it over to you, Ed.
Well, perfect. I'm going to share my screen here. I should mention I did work at corn growers at one point, national corn growers. So don't hold it against me, soybean folks. We're all in the same camp, trying to help each other. But been at this for a long time. This will be, I think, fifth farm bill for me, depending on how you count them, if 2012 counts or not. I count it because I worked on it, even though it didn't go anywhere. But we've got a lot going on. What I'm going to try to do today is really talk about how bankers and lending fall into the farm bill process, why we care about it. I mean, outside of the obvious, you're our customers. We want you all to do well, right? But how we can tie into this whole thing. Um, so I'll start out. We have a banker committee from across the country, two different committees at ABA, and it's actually the second oldest committee at ABA. We started in 1913, representing agricultural bankers across the country. The states in red are on our policy committee, is the easiest way to think about it. The states in blue are on our planning committee for our agricultural bankers conference. Uh, Out of Illinois, we have Becky King with Old National Bank is currently on our committee. She's tremendous. Her and her team. You might know Ed Gromes. He's the other guy who's with them. But they're a great team, and they really care about ag and what's going on there. ABA, in a nutshell, we work with literally everybody. We have to. There are banks in every single state, congressional district, territory, military installations. I mean, we are everywhere as far as the lending spectrum goes. As we always say, we represent the 22 trillion in assets in the United States and the 2 million plus bank employees. So, big organization. We work across, as you can see, just about every committee you can imagine in Congress. We have a touch point. Um, for example, here's something you probably never think about. I don't even have it on the list. We work the education committee. Why? There's ATMs on college campuses, things like that, banking services on college campuses. So we are literally everywhere and have to be. But ag has been a focus for us for a long, long time, and you'll see why as we dig into some things here. So, what do we care about? Right? What are we working on? What are we paying attention to? And this is where we'll get into a little deeper dive. Our list never gets shorter, is what I've noticed over time. So we're working the USDA loan programs, and I think they're going to be more important than ever over the next couple of years for a variety of reasons. We work the House and Senate Ag committees and Ag Appropriations committees from the Ag and Rural standpoint. I'll talk about the Acre Act. I'll try not to dwell on it too much. It'll feed into what Danielle is going to be talking about a bit later. Um, we're always monitoring the farm credit system. Straight honest with all of you, they're a competitor of ours. They're a unique competitor in a lot of ways. I won't dwell on the relationship and all that, but we work with them and against them depending on what's going through Congress and what we need to pay attention to. Much like, think of it like the soy corn relationship sometimes. Think about it in some ways almost like the corn cotton relationship, right? So corn and cotton fight with each other sometimes, but then they work with each other on other things. Always paying attention to rural development, always watching hemp and cannabis and being able to finance those products. There's a lot of things that go into that. watching climate smart ag and carbon and all those things just to see what it does for potential cash flow and other things for all of you. And then crop insurance. And I should just say general insurance, right? Livestock insurance, dairy insurance, crop insurance. It's all our risk management backstop. But let's get into some numbers here. And I'm not an economist, I'm not a lawyer, right? So all my all my opinions are free or money back type situation here. But as we get into what we're paying attention to and what we're watching is farm debt at commercial banks continues to increase. You'll notice in 2020, 21, we had large drop offs, and we'll get into that in a second. I think you all know why debt went down over that period, but it's been continuing to climb. So on this chart, anything over zero is an increase from the year before. So you see, yet again, 2024, we had an increase in farm debt. And we expect this to continue to go up because you're all getting more loans or lending from the commercial side, commercial bank side of the world. Um, you'll see across there, non-real estate is your operating lines, right? Your year-to-year operating. Real estate is your farmland, your other things like that. So we're watching all of it. Real estate goes up, goes down really pending on what whether land's moving or not and whether you're using us as an option when you buy land. On the non-real estate side, operating lines are really matters how much cash you have in your pockets as far as whether you're doing operating lines. You all know this intuitively. You're going in every year trying to refinance and do all the other renew and all the things you got to do. At the same time, debt is going up, net farm income's decreasing. Everybody's seen this chart 1,000 times at this point, right? And there was a lot of talk over this last year, last 2 years. Well, we're at a 20-year average for net farm income. Well, that's fine, right? But we got used to where we were going in 18, 19, 20, 21, right? Net income went up tremendously. And what I think gets forgotten sometimes is that when net income goes up, it does mean more cash in your pocket, but that's very short-lived because the chemical companies, the seed companies, your landlords, everything else goes up as well. So we have to really take the last chart with debt increasing combined with income increasing or decreasing, right? So income goes up, but now it's starting to come back down. And at the same time, debt in the commercial institutions is going up. So really kind of an interesting thing to look at when you pay attention to kind of trends and what's going on. And I should say, Farm Doc in Illinois from the University of Illinois, great resource on a lot of this type of stuff. That's probably where you've seen this chart before, but just giving you kind of from an ABA perspective how we watch this. Let's talk payments to farmers, right? Payments to farmers were big in 20 and 21. I showed you the debt chart, what happened in 20 and 21. Debt in commercial institutions went down. It's not that we wanted to make less lending, it's that not as many of you came to us asking for lending. Well, this reflects that. We had $62 billion go out in 20 and 21. In 25, we'll have 10 billion go out, at least. And I'll touch on that in a bit here. So when we're looking at these things from a banking standpoint, all these different things that combine across the board. But payments went down the last couple of years, which is kind of leading into maybe some things we got to be watching here. And the last big chart for you, for all of you to pay attention to. Every 5 years they do ag census, right? You all get surveyed by USDA. You send your census data back, all those things. 10% of farms account for 66% of production in the United States, and 86% of farms are small. It's interesting to think about where our share of farms are and where our production is located. I talk about this a lot from the banking angle because for banks, if you're a $100 million community bank, let's say in like Geneseo or places like that, right? Outside the Quad Cities. If you're a $100 million community bank, your legal lending limit to any one farmer is any one individual is $2 to $2.5 million. Think about your operation. The bigger your operation gets, the less likely it is you can go to one of our small institutions, and that's just based on rules and regs around the size of an institution. So we've been talking a lot on the banking industry side. We have consolidation happening as well. Agriculture has consolidation happening, but I think it's interesting for everyone to pay attention to your little itty bitty bank on the corner of Main and Division in your small towns is going to have a harder and harder time doing larger and larger ag credits just due to regulatory environment. And it's really risk based in a lot of those things. So it's something a trend we're watching. Maybe small farmers start to come back in more. Who knows? But it's changed the banking industry and it changes how we approach some things at USDA. And the last thing I'll say here, economic assistance. Let's talk about this for a little bit. $10 billion dollars is going out the door. It has to go out the door within 90 days of enactment from the law. And I think the law passed, and Daniel probably knows better than me. I think it was the 22nd of December, somewhere in there, which means they have to be out mid-March to the end of third week of March. Money needs to be sent out the door from USDA. From a USDA standpoint, we are hearing that they are working feverishly to get people in place at the Farm Service Agency and FPAC, which oversees Farm Service Agency, the Farm Production and Conservation area of USDA, partly to get these payments moving. Okay. How this is going to work is going to be very interesting to see because we believe it would be some sort of application process, whether you get a paper check, whether it's sent electronically, that hasn't been figured out yet. I can tell you from a lending standpoint, we worked on this a lot, the economic assistance side, because we were seeing in the mid South and the Southeast, they're having 3, 4 years of losing money on cotton and peanuts and rice and all those commodities. And at some point, it just doesn't cash flow anymore, right? And it's things like they're getting hit with disasters, commodity prices were just in a bad spot. And when you think a combine's expensive, a cotton picker's $1 million and it's only used for one crop, right? So we were very active in the economic assistance push, as well as other lenders across the board, because we see this as a way to hopefully help people bridge this gap from this not great time until a farm bill gets done, which will hopefully have some help from a reference price standpoint, some of that. So when this goes out, it has to go out by law at a certain point. How it goes out, how you apply is a whole nother thing. I wish I had answers for you. I would give you answers if we had them because my bankers are calling me pretty much every week because you're all asking them when the heck it's going to happen. We're paying attention. We're hoping this moves quickly. Okay. So here's our Farm Bill priorities: increasing the guaranteed loan limits, modifying the beginning farmer and rancher programs, fixing something called the down payment assistance program. Some of you, depending on your age, might remember that program. If you bought land and used an FSA loan, we have a down payment assistance program at USDA, but it wasn't indexed correctly in the last Farm Bill. Uh, Interest assistance is a program that used to exist. I don't think we're going to get it in this Farm Bill, but we view it as a way to help drive down interest costs when you're getting FSA loans. Rural development funding is lacking, I think is the nicest way to say it. And rural development needs all the resources they can to really move things forward. And as bankers, we want to see it move forward more and more. And then modernize technology for USDA programs. I'm going to pick on USDA folks if there's any on here. Not pick on, I feel bad for all of you. I love Windows 95. It worked great, right? We're way beyond that technology now. And the sad thing is, for a lot of our FSA offices, especially on the loan side, they're using Windows 95, Windows 98. Sometimes they're using DOS programs. Their lending platform is based out of a program from the 1960s. I mean, they're just short of having an abacus sitting on their desk, right? So we need to make sure we modernize technology to help USDA better make loans, create more efficiency, and better communicate with lenders in the back channel side of the world. So you as farmers would never accept to have some of these things happening in your regular FSA programs, but they are happening on the lending side, and it's really quite frustrating. Okay, I'll go over Farm Bill somewhat quickly because I think I have 20 minutes total. But there's 12 titles in the Farm Bill. The three that matter the most to lenders are credit, rural development, and crop insurance. Why? Credit and rural development have lending programs that we utilize the most. Crop insurance title gives us risk management. We care about all the other titles. Don't get me wrong. Bankers have a play in nutrition based on EBT cards and some things there. There's trade credits, there's conservation loans, there's all kinds of stuff that exists. But really, the credit title, rural development, crop insurance are the big ones we're always watching. I don't know if you are all aware of this. There are conservation loan programs, there's trade loan programs, there's forestry loans. I mean, loans exist all over USDA. It's a $1 trillion portfolio. But credit and rural development is where most of the work gets done. But let's break that down quick, okay? In the credit title, that's where you make any changes to farm credit, Farmer Mac, the FSA loan programs. That all falls under the credit title. So we're watching that very closely, and we're always heavily involved in that because the credit title is a way for a lot of you to have a backstop. Again, when economic times are not great, having that backstop can mean a lot. Or if you're on the beginning farmer side of the world, sometimes an FSA guarantees the best way to get in, get a loan, and get it done. Depending on your age, some of you might have gone through Farmer's Home way back in the day, right? That went away in the early 90s and became FSA, but it's a similar idea, using those USDA programs to maybe make that first land purchase. On the rural development side, there's things like business and industry, community facilities, which is building your hospitals, fire stations, rural community facilities. Rural Energy for America. Some of you probably got grain dryer upgrades using the REAP program. The Rural Housing Service all falls under rural development. So we're always involved in that title, trying to push that money forward. And I always say it's the most consequential title outside of the nutrition title for kind of your general American population. And then crop insurance title provides our risk management. You all know how that works. We could have a million debates about AIPs and all the things that go into that. Here's the big things from the House Farm Bill. We expect to see these again. Increasing the guaranteed loan limits. Okay, currently they're capped at 2.2 million to any one individual. We would like to see ownership go to 3.5 million and operating go to 3 million. Why? I think we're going to have some farmers walking back into FSA offices to maybe have a loan secured that way that we haven't seen in 20 years, and they're not going to be small credits. I think we're going to have some folks walking in that need the higher numbers, right, in order to even get the loans and work through these things. Banks love the guaranteed loan program. Farm Credit does as well. I mean, we're both heavy users of the program because it provides risk management for us, which actually drives down your cost. Okay, it drives down your interest rate cost. The other thing going on the ownership side, land is not getting cheaper. And because we're talking to Illinois folks, we'll pick on the Iowans. They think there's gold deposits under their land in some of those spots when they're going $33,000 an acre, $32,000 an acre. It's just unbelievable costs on the ownership side. So, from a beginning farmer standpoint, driving these up is going to help them as well because it gives them flexibility when buying that first land purchase. I wouldn't recommend going right to 33 grand an acre on your first purchase. Doesn't really pencil out well. But nonetheless, they got to be able to have some flexibility there. Mentioned down payment assistance. That's a program that's just literally does what it says. It's down payment assistance. And then on the bona fide operator rules, there's some issues there of for your beginning farmer. It's easier to get a loan if your mom or dad's a farmer. It's a lot harder if it's your aunt or uncle or the neighbor down the street you'd like to eventually partner with and do things. So we're just trying to make it easier to get beginning farmer loans. The other fascinating thing on beginning farmer is that you have to have 3 years of farming experience to get a beginning farmer loan. Think about what I just said there. You have to somehow farm for 3 years before you're deemed eligible to get a loan to be a farmer. We're trying to get all that changed because it just doesn't make sense for us. Farmer Mac is a secondary buyer. We want them to have more ability to purchase loans because then, as banks, we can package and sell those loans, drive down the costs, drive down the interest rates, all those things. So, Farmer Mac is something we're always supporting. There was some disaster pieces in the Farm Bill, and then increasing commodity programs, 90% coverage. I can tell you, as a farm kid from central Minnesota, our yields were too high to qualify for crop insurance, but not high enough to negate the low commodity prices. So, like many of you, we have 100,000 bushels of corn sitting in our grain bins, And I've been yelling at my dad every day about why are you still holding on to this? It's just, but a lot of you know this. You get into that donut hole gap and it's a bad situation. And we've seen that across the country. Other things we're working on as I come down the stretch here a little bit on a few things. We're paying attention to the average age of the farmer. The scary thing for us, the average age of the ag banker is not much different than the average age of the farmer. So we have a new generation that needs to be trained up, needs to come in and needs to take over not only farming operations, but lending side of the world too. We support insurance, crop insurance, dairy insurance, pasture insurance. I would try to get federally subsidized insurance on everything I could as a lender, because for us, it drives down risk, which is important. We support biofuel programs. It's our policy at ABA to support it, because it's a rural development economic thing in a rural area. And then tax issues. I'm not going to feed into Danielle's area, but there's a lot, and we care about all of it as much as all of you do. Trust me on that, because if estate taxes don't get extended, we're going to have some very interesting conversations with customers. I will get into a tax issue we're working on here real quickly. Access to credit for our Rural Economy Act, also known as the ACRE Act. The ACRE Act, it changes the tax structure for banks. Currently, farm credit is not taxed on income they earn from farm real estate. Banks are, so that's a 21% tax difference. We believe by lowering this tax and removing that tax side, it will be a pass through to savings on interest rates. Okay. What we're seeing on the interest rate side is our analysis shows 50 to 150 basis points. 125 seems to be kind of what everybody's landing on what would happen in their institution. So 1.25% change in interest rates, lowering of interest rates by having this go through. Almost 70 members of Congress were on it last time, including Representative Badinsky from Illinois and some other members as well. So we're pushing this again this Congress. It should be introduced, I mean, frankly, today or tomorrow is what we've been told. And we're going to try to get into the tax reform process, much like everybody else is. It affects ag real estate, timberland, ranch land, anything that qualifies as farm real estate, right? Any single family residence in a town of 2,500 or less or open country, that's farm credit statute. So we just copied and pasted. And then any aquaculture facility. I don't know if a lot of you are doing catfish on the side in Illinois, but they would qualify. Fishing vessels, deep sea fishing vessels will qualify the way we've changed it. Who won't qualify is foreign nationals. Pick your favorite, China, Russia, Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, your favorite adversary, not allowed to use ACRE. And then we also have to send a report to Congress within 5 years about how it changes interest rates if this goes in. That's a couple things we've changed recently. The important website for all of you is ACRE Toolkit, aba.com/ACRE Toolkit. We've got information on every single state, how it affects states. If you want to send letters, we can help you with all that. We won't stop you. Social media, all those types of things. That's where to find that. And my PowerPoint can be shared with all of you as well, so you have this information longer term. aba.com/ag banking, AG banking, and we put a ton of information out. I don't think any of you are going to take graduate level banking school, but we are trying to get that offered for our bankers. We do provide webinars, much like this one we're on today. We do a scorecard comparing banks, and then we do a survey that shows where banks are and what they're thinking about the ag economy, and all of those types of things. And then we have a monthly newsletter like everybody does. And we have an Ag Bankers Conference. You don't have to be a banker to show up, but November 12th through the 14th in St. Louis. Danielle has spoken at this conference before. We get a pretty good crowd. We try to have a variety of topics. It's going to be very economic heavy. And maybe that's where I show my contact info so you have it. But bankers in the ag economy, and I'll take about 2-3 minutes here, Danielle, and I'll pop it over to you. We're very nervous. And when I say we're very nervous, that's a nice way of saying we're pretty terrified of where this could go. We started talking last March and about how we thought we were staring over a cliff. We brought that up with Senate and House Ag committees. And as you all know, things did not get better. And then in July, we had a hearing about what was going on in the ag economy. We saw it coming in about January, February of last year. Because when you come in and do loan renewals, we see who's having an easy renewal, who's not, all those types of things. So we're trying to stay ahead of it. We're trying to do things like open up USDA to make the programs more usable. Make sure that if you took a loan out at 19 and now you're 35, that you're not termed out, right? Stuff like that. We're trying to set you up so we can basically bridge over this valley that's going to happen. We don't want to create a mountain, but we do want to bridge a valley. And that's our plan right now of our strategy. And I will tell you this, for all the years of us fighting with Farm Credit on different things, we are working together feverishly on this, trying to make sure that we're helping all of you continue to be successful in your operations. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Danielle. I haven't seen any questions. Maybe we'll get some here at some point, but there's my contact info. Get a hold of me if you need me for anything. I know I said a lot, but that's just kind of how I roll. Danielle's used to it with me.
I will also mention, yeah, if you guys, I know there's a lot of information. If you guys have any questions, please just put it in the chat, and we'll have about 10, 15 minutes at the end to kind of go over some questions and answers. So please submit questions if you have any.
Perfect. And I'll stop sharing so Danielle can pop in.
Thanks. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm Danielle Beck. I work for Invariant. We're a bipartisan government relations firm here in Washington, D.C. Really excited to talk to you today about tax policy because if there's one thing that Congress gets done this year, it's probably a tax bill. And so, figured I would start with a little bit of stage setting, then talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, some of the key policies for agriculture, and then a little bit on advocacy, and then we can move into questions. But before I dive into that, I need to offer up the caveat that I am not a tax professional. I'm very well equipped to offer advice if you're looking on how to best advocate on agriculture and engage with your delegation in Washington, D.C., but I'm not a tax preparer. So nothing in today's presentation should be construed as tax advice. With that, Republicans have a very ambitious agenda for the 119th Congress between Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, and then President Trump in the White House. This represents a tremendous opportunity to get quite a bit accomplished, but again, it's probably going to be a little bit difficult. So reconciliation is probably top of mind. Some of these issues, again, may be addressed through the administration, White House, executive orders, yada yada, like trade and tariffs. But a lot of it is really going to rely upon Congress. Here's just a quick slide on who congressional leadership is in House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats. And then the balance of power, which I think is, the most important slide because votes matter. And right now, there can't be more than two Republicans in the House of Representatives come down sick with a cold. Otherwise, they won't be able to pass bills without bipartisan support, of course. The math is going to matter quite a bit in the coming years or the next 2 years. Hopefully, we'll have two more spots filled, or three, excuse me, once Waltz, Stefanik, and Gates seats are filled. But again, still really, really tight margins. So, because of this math, they're going to have to get creative in terms of how they get things across the finish line, particularly controversial bills that may have significant costs affiliated with them, be it either creating savings or spending. So reconciliation is going to be the name of the game. You'll probably hear that word quite a bit this year. If you'll recall, it's a vehicle that's been used in years past. It's a pretty wonky DC term, but basically it is the process that allows you to get a bill across the finish line with a simple majority in the Senate. But because of that, it is not as simple as just passing the bill, right? I moved too quickly on that one. And so there are parameters around what can and cannot be in. Basically, it's called the Byrd rule or the Byrd bath in order to bypass that 60 vote threshold in the Senate. Basically, all of the provisions in this bill will have to comply with the budgetary issues. There can't be any policy related issues that impact you know that have policy changes without revenue affiliated with it. And so the way that the process works, the budget committee will adopt a budget resolution with reconciliation instructions. Those instructions get sent to all of the various committees in both chambers. Those committees then go to work turning that into bills, and whether they're being instructed to come up with savings or address certain, policy provisions on the Ways and Means side. I'm thinking tax policy specifically. They'll pass all of those out and then package them together, and then it can be moved through the floor process. So who are the leaders in this space? This is our budget committee leadership. And it sounds like, the budget committee should start this process next week. They'll be meeting, at least the House Budget Committee will be. And then we could be looking at a package out, in the springtime. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, though. So Senate Finance will be responsible for drafting all of the tax-related policy provisions Senate side, and then the House Ways and Means in the House. And so I italicized several of the Illinois members. You have a very good delegation to work with here in DC. And that representation is going to be important because I anticipate that they will be debating quite a few relevant matters for food and agricultural producers. So Tax Cuts and Jobs Act overview. The TCJA represented the biggest tax overhaul since the Tax Reform Act of 1986. It was a vehicle it passed via reconciliation. Portions of the law were made permanent. So on the corporate side, that reduction in the corporate rate, that was a permanent change. However, if you'll recall, all of the provisions on the individual side of the tax code are not permanent. A lot of them are expiring at the end of 2025. There are some that started to sunset earlier. The reason that this happened was a scoring issue. They could not lower the corporate rate to enough, percentage points that the president wanted them to, in addition to making all the changes that were necessary on the individual side in order and pass that bird bath. It was not sort of revenue neutral. It scored over that 10-year period of time, and it was going to cost a lot of money. And so what they did is they took a gamble, and thankfully things have worked out. Republicans had the majority back in 2017, House, Senate, White House, and they were able to pass this bill, knowing that there was an opportunity for them to potentially be in control again when everything was sunsetting. This is how it worked out, and here we are. So permanent provisions that help agriculture, definitely worth mentioning. So Section 179, business expensing, that was increased to $1 million. There's also an indefinite carry forward of deductions indexed for inflation. The depreciation schedule for farm equipment was shortened from 7 to 5 years. There's that 21% corporate tax rate, and then they repealed the alternative minimum tax. However, all of the key provisions that I think a lot of the folks dialed in really care about are set to expire. So more than 98% of farms and ranches operate as pass-through businesses, sole proprietorships, partnerships, sub-S corps. Failure to extend these provisions is going to result in a really significant tax increase. And so TCJA made certain changes, and we need to see Congress address those. So reducing the pass-through tax rates and expanding those brackets, if that's not extended, we're going to see higher tax rates. 20% business income deduction, 199A, so pass-through businesses would no longer be able to deduct up to 20% of qualified income after December 31st or January 1st, 2026. This benefit is critical to helping farm and ranch businesses remain economically sustainable in all seasons. It's also how they achieved parity, allegedly, with the corporate rate. It's, I think, very important that all businesses, regardless of their size or structure, are subject to the same rates. It would be terribly unfair for corporations to have access to a lower deduction simply because they're structured that way. Unlimited bonus depreciation or expensing. If that's not continued, farmers and ranchers are going to be unable to offset their income with deductions for their business investments. It's especially critical because like-kind exchanges for equipment and livestock are appealed. Doubling the estate tax exemption to 11 million per person, 22 million per couple. That's what the TCJA did. So the exemption will revert back to pre-2017 levels at 5 million an individual, 10 million a couple, adjusted for inflation. If that exemption is allowed to revert back, more farms and ranches are going to be subject to pretty massive estate taxes. And then increasing that AMT threshold for individuals, rolling that back will cancel important deductions and credits put in place by the TCJA. If this sounds like mumbo jumbo, I'm happy to talk through any of the individual provisions in more depth during the Q&A. Stepped up basis is what I really want to talk about, though, because this was a bit of a debate last go around. So stepped up basis is sort of the tax provision, not that nobody talks about, but I think often is like, the silent cousin of the death tax, right? We talk a lot about the death tax, its impact on businesses, whether or not, your operation is large enough to, or in your assets large enough to sort of exceed that estate tax threshold. Everyone is impacted by stepped up basis. So, this is a tool in the tax code that allows long-term sustainability of your family-owned business operation, particularly when it comes to continuity across generations. Capital gains taxes are paid when a business, including a farm or ranch, sells a long-term capital asset such as land. The tax is based on the amount that the asset has increased in value since the purchase. With stepped up basis slash carryover basis, capital gains taxes are not imposed when those assets are transferred to an heir after the death of a loved one. The tax law also allows the heir to increase or step up the basis of the inherited assets to fair market value without paying a capital gains tax. And so repealing stepped up basis by imposing capital gains taxes at death would force many family-owned farms and ranches to liquidate assets, to pay the taxes. And then this new tax would be imposed on top of any existing estate tax liability, essentially creating an unthinkable second tax at death. I want to clarify that Republicans in Congress are not talking about repealing stepped up basis. However, the math is going to be important in this current reconciliation process, and stepped up basis represents a massive pay for. It's a good revenue raiser. It's untapped. And so even, minor changes could offset the cost of everything else. There are a couple interesting statistics on stepped up basis that I want to rattle off, and then, a few more comments. So, one analysis by Texas A&M suggests that these proposals would result in an additional tax liability of over $700,000 per farm for 92 out of 94 representative farms in its database. So that's more than the vast majority, right? A separate study by Iowa State University suggests that if stepped up basis were eliminated, a full-time farmer who owns just 358 acres of farmland would see his or her tax liability from a lifetime sale increase from over 475,000 to 860,000. It's a staggering 81% increase. EY has also done additional analysis, and it shows that repealing stepped up basis would result in 80,000 fewer jobs annually for the first 10 years, and a reduction of US GDP by approximately 10 billion annually. So it's a silent tool in the toolbox of the tax code that nobody really talks about, but any minor change could have massive ramifications. So, I think, again, looking forward to reconciliation. It's our understanding, and this is a readout from the GOP conference that took place over the weekend and beginning of this week down in Florida, with President Trump. The plan is not to score any of the extensions for TCJA provisions, which is great news. That means that all of that, extension. So assuming they continue forward that 10 million exemption on the death tax for individuals, 20 million for couples, instead of allowing it to revert back. In the real world, that costs money, but through, fancy Washington, D.C. math, which is not always real sometimes, they will be able to score that as neutral, which will allow them to put new policies in play. So like the Acre Act that Ed was talking about, there has been a ton of work happening for the last several years, actually, since the start of last Congress, where under Chairman Jason Smith's leadership, the Ways and Means Committee has really been doing a ton of groundwork for today. Looking at different proposals, there were a series of tax working groups. They held field hearings, listening to different industry representatives and stakeholders talking about the needs in the tax code. President Trump has also identified a few different proposals he would like to see included in this process. First being eliminating any taxation on tips. He's also talked about eliminating taxes on Social Security and overtime. Again, all of these have pretty big scores. I think the tax on tip is another one. And so how they figure out all of the math is a big question. They have their work cut out for them. They cannot afford to lose any votes, especially in the House, in order to get things across the finish line. And it's going to be a long process. So, TCJA, that kicked off right after the first of the year, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, wasn't officially signed into the law. It was like either 11 or 13 months later. And it was quite a flurry and a whirlwind. So again, lots happening in Washington, D.C. I wish that the Farm Bill was something that I could guarantee was on the docket for votes this year. I'm less optimistic. I think if there's one bill to bet on as crossing the finish line, it's going to be a reconciliation package that addresses the tax code. So, lots to think about, lots to consider. But one thing I do want to end with. So prior to joining Invariant, I was with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association for 6 years. I led the tax and credit portfolio for NCBA, but I also co-led the Tax Aggies Coalition with the American Farm Bureau Federation, and that was a ton of fun. Very candidly, prior to joining NCBA, I used TurboTax. I now hire a tax professional to help with my taxes every year. And so when I started and they handed me the tax portfolio, I was like, why are you doing this? I don't know anything about the tax code. But what I figured out very quickly is that there are a lot of really great tax staffers on Capitol Hill who know absolutely nothing about agriculture policy. And there are a lot of really great ag staffers on the Hill who know absolutely nothing about tax policy. And so, my sort of special secret sauce at the time was being able to translate to those tax staffers, this is what agriculture does. I know you don't understand the difference between, a Holstein and an Angus, but, these are how the businesses are structured. They're very complex. Farmers and ranchers utilize a lot of different business structures. They operate in a way that works best for them and their individual business, but they're also, family-owned business, and they have a lot of, unique dynamics that most other industries don't have, from, sensitivities and vulnerabilities to weather fluctuations, crop inputs, you name it. There's a lot that makes agriculture unique. And leading that coalition effort was something I still feel really, really proud of because we leveraged grassroots. And I can't emphasize enough how important grassroots engagement is. Ed and I are like fixtures here in the swamp that is Washington, D.C. And, we don't hate the swamp. It's something that we do every day. But, you know, you're the real people who are their constituents back home. You are who matter. And so your elected officials need to hear from you. And there's a really good chance that their ag staffer is probably not as well versed in the tax provisions. Feel free to communicate to them, bring them up to speed so that they can keep their tax staffer looped in, or engage with the tax staffer so that they have a level of awareness. Because especially in a state like Illinois, you carry a lot of weight, and as things are moving, it's going to be really important. And I will end with like a story that Ed has heard more than once, but you know, I'm originally from Massachusetts, and a lot of people during my time at NCBA and even when I was on the Hill were very confused as to how gal from Massachusetts ended up in the food and agriculture world. When I first took over the ag portfolio, we were both working on the 2012 Farm Bill together, and I was reading a What is the Farm Bill CRS report. I knew nothing about food and agriculture other than, I drove by a couple cranberry bogs in my hometown in Massachusetts growing up. But there were producers who took the time to come to Washington, D.C. to educate me, take me under their wing. There was no question that was a dumb question that I asked, even though I definitely asked a lot of dumb questions. And they invited me out to their operations and they took me around tours, and I fell in love with it. Agriculture is what my whole career is about now, because of those experiences and because of that advocacy. So, if you're wondering about, how to get engaged, or whether or not it's worth it, I encourage you to do so because it really does make a difference. And with that, maybe we can turn to questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you to both of you. This has been super informative, and just thank you again. So I think one of our first questions, if whoever, how many jobs are estimated to be lost if we lose stepped up basis?
So I believe it was 80,000. Let me pull that up because I have it on a note. I don't want to forget it. Yeah, 80,000 fewer jobs annually for the first 10 years after a repeal. So 80,000 a year for 10 years.
And something I want to say on the tax side, first of all, you should try doing finance, right? Where it's like people know finance really well and they don't understand ag and all that, right? So Danielle and I are lucky lucky, quote unquote. We get to be like representatives of both. Like I always feel like I'm straddling two worlds. But on the tax side, it's interesting too because you talked through about the pass through thing, right? The sub S pass through and some of that. That's a big issue for banks as well. A third of our banks are sub S corp banks, and actually, a lot of you probably know a sub S corp without realizing it because they tend to be small rural community banks. But then the other two-thirds are C corp. So now we're dealing with trying to push for both from a tax standpoint and all of that. And I think it's important for everybody to understand it's going to be super complicated. There's going to be a lot of things. You're going to read or hear things about this benefit's going away, and it might not actually be going away. It's just like somebody's absolutely wound up about it. And this process, I do agree with Danielle. I think it has to get done, right? Farm Bill might get pushed to the wayside just because like you have to get tax reform done. Otherwise, like the amount it changed the economy and the way it would just mess with things would be unbelievable. And as the son of a 64-year-old farmer, you better believe like the estate tax thing is very much like we're paying attention, right? Obviously, and how it would change our operation. So, what we need, I think, to Danielle's point as well, y'all, we need your like participation big time on all this stuff. Like, push your members, tell them like if something is a bad idea, and let them know on both sides of the aisle. Don't be afraid to like say just go along, get along. You got to tell both sides of the aisle like this stuff. We like this, we hate that. And one thing about soy growers and a lot of other orgs, you're great at doing a lot of that stuff already. But it's just I think it's always good to reiterate, keep making noise. So.
Another question. And you kind of touched on this, Ed, but so how might the reauthorization of TCJA, how does that affect or does it affect the Farm Bill either positively or negatively?
I so I'll let Danielle jump in too, but my guess, I think the House Farm Bill process on the committee side is not very hard because they did it once already. They have the text. It went through. They had four Democrats jump on last time. I honestly think they could get a few more with a few give and takes here and there. I also think there are some people based on the ranking members' leadership last Congress that were just going to vote against it no matter what because somebody told them from as Congressman Frank Lucas always calls it, management, right? In the House side, he always calls leadership management. Somebody in management told Democrats not a great idea to vote for this, regardless. So I think that became made it a little harder. The Senate's going to have to go through a whole hearing process. The first one is noticed for what, 2 weeks from now, a week from now. That's going to be a commodity one with like Farm Bureau and Farmers Union and all those groups. Corn, soy, everybody's kind of invited to that. So the Senate has to go through their whole process, but it's going to be really interesting because you're going to have two things going on at once. You're going to have the ag committees doing their bit, but then you're going to have all the other committees that might touch ag, like House Ag has members on both Ways and Means and Ag Committee. And on the Senate side, it's even more so. There's that committee crossover is like 5 or 6 members, Danielle, something like that. So they're going to be trying to do both. I think tax reform gets done just because like the president's going to want it to get done and almost like force it. Is it one bill? Is it two bills? I don't think that matters. But something's going to get done, right? Farm Bill might just kind of get shoved to the wayside, and then all of a sudden on September 29th, it's like, oh yeah, we got to do this thing too, right? Like the downside is, and Chairman Thompson alluded to this at Farm Bureau earlier this week. I think it's this week. I can't even remember anymore. Yeah, earlier this week, um, they they need to get that process rolling as well because there's budgetary things around it. There's stuff tied into it, and if we don't get a Farm Bill done soon, then we miss this crop year again. And that's going to be an issue because if we don't get reference prices increased, we're going to create some problems there. But Daniel, is there anything I said wrong on that from where you guys sit? You're watching all this all the time too.
Yeah, so I think Senate side, Chairman Bozeman, now that he's in the position of chair instead of ranking member, and there's a new ranking member with Stabenow's retirement, um, ranking member Klobuchar, like they're going to want to sort of take their time. And Klobuchar needs to sort of get up to speed there. She's going to want to have an opportunity to sort of influence the process, if you will. And quite frankly, I don't know that the working relationship between Stabenow and Bozeman's teams last Congress was like all that constructive, especially towards the end. And so House side, I think especially Chairman Thompson has said a couple different times recently, like he wants to get it done by March. They don't have the time or the comfortability level to operate on that timeline or a similar timeline. Senate side, they will, go through the hearing process. They'll be deliberative. There will be substantive negotiations. Um, I'm very excited though that Mr. Thune is now the leader, the majority leader in the Senate, because he is a huge proponent of agriculture. And so, Bozeman and Thune will be working together to identify opportunities in the calendar where there could be floor time for Farm Bill passage. And then basically what they'll do is they'll work backwards from that, and that will determine, their committee schedule. House side, I Ed is right. Like I'm not concerned about the bill. They have it written absent, tweaks that need to be made because of big scoring changes. I don't think we should expect to see many, massive policy shifts unless, there are a couple different issues I can think of that, might have been sticky last go around. And so they didn't, ultimately make it into the bill. If there's opportunity to socialize those further, increase the comfortability, they can make it in. I think the bigger challenge House side, though, is the division in the Republican Party. With Trump pulling for reconciliation, that was a massive, TCJA was a massive campaign commitment that he has to make good on. There wasn't a campaign commitment like that made on the Farm Bill, at least not, sort of that elevated level with attention. And there are going to be a lot of Republicans that don't want to pass, a $1 trillion bill that they are misinformed about, to for lack of a better way to describe it, because they think it's wasteful spending either on the nutrition side or the Title I side.
And the other thing too, we haven't passed a full-throated new farm bill since 2002. Every farm bill has been an extension of the last farm bill with modifications, right? Like, and I think that's something interesting to keep in your back pocket is are Bozeman and GT the two that want to do a totally new farm bill? I don't know. I think it's tweaks around the edges, with reference prices maybe being the biggest tweak, right? Around the edge because they have to be increased, especially for southern commodities, because southern commodities, the math just doesn't add up. I can tell you from a lender standpoint. So it'll be a fun process.
For sure. I think we have time for a couple more questions. One question we have, so Section 174 R&D tax credits. Is this something an ordinary farmer could get for on-farm product testing?
That's a really good question. I think it would depend on how sort of well prepared your tax professional is. I don't see why not, because as a business entity, you should be able to. But I think, it also depends on what you're trying to use it for, right? And so, like, you know, uh, market research, advertising, sales promotions, any research that's done after, commercial production of a product has begun, quality control, research that's funded by another party or anything that's conducted outside the US, which obviously isn't relevant for you all, that's not, uh, you know, and those are not eligible deductions. You have to be really careful about your documentation, and making sure that it falls into that bucket of qualified research activities. Again, there are some really wonderful like, tax professionals out there. And I would say if it's something you're interested in exploring, they would be able to make sure, you're on the right track.
I have no cut. You're getting into uncharted territory for me on that one. So.
It's okay. That was a great answer. Thank you. So I guess like just one last question. I think there's been this conception that, the GOP controls Congress and the White House, so TCJA should be like a smooth passage. But given that it is going to be a tremendous amount of money. It's going to it has a big cost to it. What should farmers anticipate, and kind of how do you think they should prepare for some of those provisions like stepped up basis, estate tax, 199A, et cetera?
Yeah. Um, I think I'm gonna make a prediction and I'm gonna knock on wood so that I'm not jinxing us. I think that we can expect that most of the provisions that matter to agriculture will be carried forward. And so that means that if you updated your estate planning, for example, in 2018, that should still stay. But I sort of can offer those to expect a bumpy ride. There are going to be a lot of debates about, sort of more controversial issues. Salt is a big one, so it's the state and local tax deduction. That I think, I mean, that single issue could tank the whole process. And so, like, they're going to have to figure out how to navigate that. If there are portions of the tax code that like either aren't working for you, could be working better, or your trade associations that you're involved with and affiliated with are starting to socialize new opportunities, and they could have a huge benefit for you, I would say advocate, with your members of Congress in Washington, D.C., because the more that they hear from people on the ground, the better off, the better, greater chance there is that those proposals are ultimately included. Acre Act again being another example of that. But I mean, I would say like the level of understanding. I mean, like, if you think about your average Hill staffer, like none of them are old enough to legally rent a car, right? Which is slightly terrifying, especially given they're in charge of, policies and proposals that impact day-to-day lives in a very real way. Um, None of them have any idea about the cost of estate planning. And frankly, like I didn't either until I just helped my parents with their estate plan over the summer. And that expense, what it was really pretty simple for them, was a lot for an actual agricultural operation. I can only imagine. I mean, there's just like such a lack of understanding on the complexities. And so if you have a really unique business setup too, again, I sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about, right? Especially in the context of the estate tax. Nobody really wants to acknowledge their own mortality, but it's so, so important, because you can't assume that there are other people who are advocating and educating for you. And if you're I hate this. It's like such a corny adage, but I think it's very true. It's one of those, if you're not at the table, you could end up on the plate.
And I'll jump in from it's interesting. I think I'm knocking on wood as well. 199A, estate. I think a lot of that stuff is going to be in there. We're not to give away our lobbying secrets, but one thing we are telling some of our folks is when we have some of our really big issues, like don't go in and be like, Senator, I need you to support estate taxes. 75 senators support like not increasing state taxes, right? I mean, you can probably name the 25 that are not going to be real helpful on it. And that's all kinds of other reasons for that. But we're watching things really closely, more like, does corporate rate change? Even go from 21 to 23% is a massive change, from like a cost standpoint, things like that. So those I think where the debates are going to start up and be really heavy is around that type of stuff. It's the nibbling at the edges. Have like our Acre Act. Like we've been told it's pencil dust in the grand scheme of things, but it is a cost. And anything that is a cost is now you have to figure out how to offset. And then you're also going to have some strange bedfellows, Collin, of now I care about spending, even though every vote I took for 10 years, I did not care about spending. I am now a fiscal hawk. And it's like, where did this come from, right? Like, it frustrates the heck out of me because we see that in Farm Bill. Oh, this Farm Bill is so expensive. It's like, so you want more expensive food? Like, pick one or the other, right? So we're going to see some folks all over the place. I laugh on Farm Bill alone. You're going to have 30 Republicans that won't vote for a Farm Bill, even if they wrote it, they would still not vote for it. They just think USDA shouldn't exist, right? So like that's a whole dynamic playing into this, which tax will have its own sets of that going on. Ag will have its own sets of that going on. The one thing I would say that's a big plus, Chairman Smith is from an ag district in Missouri. He understands it. He owns farmland, runs some cattle. Like he gets it intimately, which I think is when he does an interview, pay attention because he doesn't do a lot of them and he does give signals of what he's trying to do when he does it. So that would be my thing there as we hit the top of the hour, unfortunately. We could talk for 2 hours on this, Danielle.
Well, yeah, like you said, we did hit we've hit our hour. So I just want to thank you guys again. It's been really informative and really good insight on just kind of Farm Bill, rural lending, TCJA, everything. So just appreciative that you guys were able to hop on. If either of you have kind of just like some final um, remarks for our farmers to think about as we go into this year, I'd welcome that. But thank you again.
Danielle, if you have anything.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity. And I know if you're watching the news, things sound absolutely crazy. They kind of are. But we will survive the chaos. And there's, I think, a lot of great opportunities that we can look forward to over the course of the next year. There's a lot for us to be hopeful about.
Thanks for having us on. I agree. Um, Stay together. Ag needs to stay together because if there's one thing Danielle's probably learned in her time doing the DC stuff, and I been ag kid myself, we need to all stick together and try to get our messaging together, and that's going to help us a lot. So don't be afraid to give a little to get a lot more. That's as we do some of our messaging and do some of that. So thanks, Collin, for having us on. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you guys. And thank you for everyone for hopping on today. Bye.